welcome. Raising Your Game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking all things inner game. Tuesdays are for sports and sports parenting. Fridays are for everybody. So how are you today? How are things with your inner game? You feeling good? I hope you are. Maybe stressed out, worried. I hope you're not, but it happens. What's going on for you? For me, it's pretty good. It just is. Healthy enough, knock wood, getting things done, though never as fast as I wish. Kids are good. Got some rain this week finally. Pretty good balance all around. Slight tinge around wishing I had a little more time. So some things to talk about today, my ups and downs for the week, the importance of taking small actions, the rise of authoritarianism around the world, fun topic there, the benefits of remembering that we all die, also more fun than it sounds, a new perspective on the good old days, our weekly challenge, and a new highly recommended show. So I'll start with the ups and downs, what things were lifting me up this past week and what things were pulling me down, making life a little bit harder. In the ups column for me this week, the big one, I played ultimate frisbee for I think the first time ever, or at least the first time like in decades, and it was just so fun, I couldn't believe it. Now it also totally kicked my ass. I was so tired. Even though I didn't actually play that much, I got so tired, I started to worry about my heart a little bit. Is this just too much? Am I doing something dumb here? I was fine, by the way, no worries. I also took a dive. At one point, it looked like I was diving to get a frisbee, like heroically. So I got some cred amongst the team for doing that. The reality was, I really just fell on my face. I got past a certain point and just couldn't stop the momentum. Down I went. Got some impressive scrapes on my knees, which are getting very itchy now. And all of that sounds like maybe it was not so great, but it was fantastic. It's so fun. My son Peter was there too, and we could not stop talking about it. Socially, it's fun. Everyone was super welcoming to the newcomers and the old guy, which is me, if you're wondering. Physically, it's fun. It really is a fun game just on its own. Also, just great to be active in a game format than just exercising. Just loved it. Peter and I are going again tonight. I'm hoping to be a little more prepared this time. Added some intervals to my runs this week to get my old legs moving a little faster. Like that's going to help. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. It probably is a bit too much for me, all things considered, but it was a total blast. Hopefully I can continue for a little while. Another one, in the summer, we have a weekly music event here in Viroqua. They block off the street, bring in a couple of bands, and that just lights me up too. We can walk or bike or scooter over there. It's not even a mile away. And of course, almost nothing is much more than a mile away in our little town. But we head over, and I just love it. Even when I don't like the music that much, which is a lot of the time, the scene is just so lovely. So many people out there. It seems like a lot of them must be coming from elsewhere because I don't usually recognize hardly anyone. But they're just having so much fun. It's just great to see and be part of. I hang out for a bit, maybe an hour or so, grab some gelato from our local shop. Could not get much better, and I love it. For the down this week, sort of a strange one, our dog came down with Lyme disease, and it was just so weird and sad to see. Dogs are normally super active and, weird and jumping on the couch and the bed and barking at the door, all that dog stuff. All of a sudden, one morning, that was just all gone. She basically couldn't move. She just laid there. If you got her up, she would just stand in this really weird way, like with one leg off the ground. It's like the whole floor was just like too hot and she wanted to touch everything, If you've seen Lyme in a dog, I think what's going on is that their joints hurt, so it hurts them to have any contact on them. It's just weird. They don't want to move. It seemed like she might have had a fever too. It's just so strange and altered and, of course, worrying. Had to carry her outside to pee. She's pretty heavy, carry her upstairs. She just looked so miserable and confused, and it was just sort of heartbreaking. But we got her some meds right away. By the end of that first day even, she was a lot better. Next morning, pretty much back to normal. You'd have to know her to know that she's still kind of dragging. It's been a couple days now. Anyway, so strange. Of course, super thankful for modern medicine, but it can't help but make you think about things like, when she'll be that old, for real, and moving like that, and the end will be coming, and thinking about mortality and loss and all that. Just a strange sort of cloud hanging over things, which, of course, is exactly what downs are, right? They're situations typically outside of our control that pull us down and make it harder to stay up where we want to be. Anyway, thankfully, that cloud passed pretty quickly. And those are my ups and downs for this week. I hope you are having a great week. Next up, our quote of the week. All right, our quote of the week. This week we'll hear from Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke lived in the mid-17th century, was a statesman, economist, philosopher, born in Ireland. His quote is, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little." Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. This feels relevant to me this week. I think about all the problems we have now with our politics and the divisions, the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, things that are opposed by the vast majority of people, but they're pushing them through anyway. Similar, the laws coming out of state legislatures on abortion and book bans and trans rights. Jesus. Again, most people against them, but they do them anyway. Just so much of that lately, and it really can't feel like there's nothing we can do about it. But the reality is, there are things we can do, of course. I mean, all those situations I mentioned were brought about by people on the right doing little things, right? The court, they've been working on that for 30 or 40 years. The state houses, the school boards, not happening by accident, right? People are intentionally putting themselves into those positions so they can enact those policies. And there's no reason we can't do the same to counter that and get things back on track. A big thing that keeps us from doing that is making the mistake of, again, doing nothing because it seems like we can only do a little. There are a ton of things we can do. All of them probably feel like they're just a little, but that's what they've been doing. All those little things add up, and they're way better than doing nothing. So that's why I'm liking one this week. Why I'm liking this one this week. Sorry. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little. And of course, it applies to all kinds of things outside of politics and public policy too. Cleaning out that closet, losing some weight. There's a ton of practical wisdom in this quote. All right, think about that, and we'll move on to our top stories. Okay, top stories. So once again this week, I don't really have much to comment on in the news. Nothing big happening that I'm interested. I am mostly just waiting for the next Trump indictments to drop. Nothing much else is getting my attention, so we can take another break from current headlines. But I did want to talk about something I saw in the Washington Post a few weeks ago. And this sort of connects with what we were just talking about a minute ago. So the story is, in Russia, they have been arresting people who speak out against their invasion of Ukraine. That's not so much news. The part that got my attention was that they are encouraging regular citizens to report on others who are not supportive. Not just opposed to the war, but not even supportive. There were reports of parishioners denouncing their priest for advocating for peace, of children telling on teachers who said things they thought were against the war, of neighbors reporting on neighbors, workers reporting co-workers who said things at the water cooler. I'll quote from the article here. "Citizens are policing one another in an echo of the darkest years of Joseph Stalin's repression, triggering investigations, criminal charges, prosecutions, dismissals from work. Private conversations in restaurants and rail cars are fair game for eavesdroppers who call police to arrest so-called traitors and enemies. Social media posts and messages, even in private chat groups, become incriminating evidence that can lead to a knock on the door by FSB agents." That's the end of the quote there. Imagine what it would be like to live in a country like that. Imagine how frightened you would be to say what you felt to anyone, because you can get into real trouble, right? No kidding. Detained, arrested, tried, jailed, killed, simply for saying you are against the invasion. A lot of people in our country scream about how their right to free speech has been violated. There was a news item this week about a lawsuit saying that because the federal government was contacting social media companies to let them know that some of the posts on their site were misinformation or were coming from terrorist groups or things like that, they were just letting them know so they could decide for themselves what to do about it, that somehow that was violating free speech rights. I'm sorry, that is just not serious, not in good faith, and not helpful. What's happening in Russia is violating free speech. When a government makes a law that restricts what you can say, that is violating free speech. That's not what's happening here. It almost never does happen here, and it's just not credible to claim that it is. But the real worry here, to me, is not what's happening in Russia. It's that the impulse to authoritarianism is on the rise around the world and here in America. When you can't criticize the government, when people who do are called traitors and enemies, and when the government encourages the citizens themselves to report on each other, that is authoritarianism. And I don't doubt for 1 minute that that's the way Donald Trump would like things to be in this country. He basically says it all the time. If anyone challenges him, criticizes him, tries to hold him accountable, God forbid, they're an enemy of the whole country somehow. They're not a patriot. He wants to use the levels of government to punish his critics. The leaders he looks up to are Putin and Kim Jong-un in North Korea. One is an authoritarian already, Kim. The other gets closer every day. That's how he'd like things to be, as long as he's the one in charge, of course. And the worst part is there are way too many people in this country who agree with him. So anyway, that's a happy thought. But I think it's worth saying, because this is a real threat around the world. We cannot let Putin win in Ukraine. And as hard as it is to believe, right here in our country. So we have to be alert to this, to pay attention, and to resist it every way we can. All right, that's it for Top Stories. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Okay, Inner Game Gold. These, of course, are the ideas and concepts I come back to over and over to help me stay on track. This week, I want to return to an old friend, Memento Mori. Remember that you die. This idea comes from Stoic philosophy, at least that's where I first heard of it. And it's not meant to be morbid, though it does kind of sound like it. Who wants to think about dying? I certainly don't. I run past a funeral home on my runs. The whole thing just creeps me out. But this is not that. This is not thinking about dying. It's remembering that we all do, and then letting that realization help us stay focused on the important things in life. For me, again, the way I use it, in any given moment, maybe I'm struggling in some little way. I'm bored, I'm uncomfortable, I'm impatient, I'm being a fuddy-duddy. I used that term, fuddy-duddy, with my son the other day, referring to myself, and he'd never heard it before. But I looked it up. It means old-fashioned and fussy, like a cranky buzzkill grandpa, which was how I was feeling at the time. Anyway, when I'm in any sort of mood like that, I'll say to myself, if I were to die tomorrow, which could absolutely happen, is how I'm being right now the way I would want to be remembered? The answer is always no, which helps me get over myself and get back into a better place. And it really works great. So in practice, it's not morbid at all. It's truly the opposite of that. It helps me be more present and happy and fully alive. So that's Memento Mori. Remember that you die. It's a beautiful piece of Inner Game Gold. All right, next up, raise your outer game. Okay, raise your outer game. Here's where we talk about the things we care about in our outer life, our health, our relationships, our finances. This week, I want to touch on mental health again, but from a different angle. I read an interesting article recently. It was called "Your Brain Has Tricked You into thinking everything is worse. In the article, the authors say they believe they have uncovered a new cognitive bias that makes us think things were better before, like in the old days. And this is a phenomenon that's always been there. In every age, people think things were better in the past. People were nicer and more moral. Everything was better. We always think that, which is a good clue that there's a cognitive bias going on, because there's not much chance that would be true, right? Anyway, the way they put it is, people think that the golden age of human kindness is long gone. And to be honest, that sounds like it might be about right, doesn't it? I apparently have that same bias. I'm guessing it might sound right to you as well. But they also studied surveys of millions of people over all those years, asking what sort of kindness and behaviors they saw in their lives from others, and it didn't actually change. There was no decline. People are generally good and kind, and that's always been the case. And of course, there's plenty of evidence that people's overall quality of lives are up in basically every way, which can also be hard to accept. But that wouldn't necessarily mean we weren't being worse to each other. But they also cite evidence that says we might actually be getting better to each other. And when I think about that, rather than just being intuitive about it, it also seems possible. We're certainly more open and accepting of people's differences and less accepting of many kinds of bad behavior, possible exception being in our politicians. But anyway, there does seem to be a big gap between perception and reality with this. So what's going on? They say that there are two cognitive biases at work. They're kind of combining to give us this new effect. One is we remember more of the negative aspects of what's going on now. The other is that we forget the negative aspects of what's happened in the past. If I was injured many years ago, for example, it was really painful, I had surgeries, all that. After a while, I sort of forget how bad it was. A funny example, I was talking with a guy one time years ago. He was in sales for a moving company. If you've ever hired movers, it is insanely expensive. But he said people were much more likely to hire them when they had moved within a few years, because they still remembered how terrible a job it is, and they would pay a lot to not go through that again. But when it's been longer, like 10 years or so, they forget. They think they can do it themselves. That's a great example of this. But back to the topic, what happens is, from these biases, when we think about what life is like now and how people are being to each other, we get the mistaken impression from our biased memory that things were better before. We were happier, people were nicer, the good old days were better in every way. So that's really interesting, I think. But what I wanted to say about it is that it's one more example of how our big, crazy brains are not really our friend. That, of course, is the whole premise of the Raise Your Inner Game book. We can't take the first things our mind tells us at face value almost ever. There are all kinds of ways that it pulls us away from what we really want and what makes us happy, which is being present and connected and feeling capable and feeling good about ourselves. When we let our thoughts and feelings and impulses lead, they almost always lead us in the wrong direction. What we need to do instead is to learn to be intentional with this process rather than just following along blindly. We notice the thoughts, we consider what they're saying, and then we decide intentionally what we will think and say and do. Anyway, it's a little more inner game than outer game, but I still thought it was interesting and a helpful reminder. We cannot let our big brains be in charge. We have to keep that control for ourselves. And of course, that's exactly what people learn in the book and our sports academy. All right, that's our outer game for this week. Next up, our charging station challenge. Okay, last week we reflected on the quote from the Raise Your Inner Game book, "The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity, and not to serve all of humanity necessarily, but to serve the people in our lives." This week, I want to reflect on Memento Mori. So here's the challenge. As you go through your days this week, every now and then, take a moment, ask yourself this question. Is how I'm being right now the way I'd want to be remembered? Just see what difference that makes for you. I know what it does for me. I think you'll love it. Okay, that's the challenge for this week. Next up, highly recommended. Okay, so these are the things I'm crazy about right now, the books, shows, gadgets, or things I'm just reviewing, letting you know my thoughts on, because my thoughts are so important, I'm sure. This week, I have one new show to talk about, and I'm laughing at myself for this one, the same way my son laughed at me when he saw what I was watching, but I found yet another sports documentary on Netflix. This one's called Quarterbacks. If you're not familiar with American football, the quarterback is the one who passes the ball. Anyway, I stumbled onto this the other night and immediately fell in love with it. I don't know what's wrong with me, but it's just so fascinating to me to see inside the lives of athletes at this level. This particular show follows 3 different quarterbacks during the 2022 season, so just last year. One fun detail for me is that one of the 3 is Kirk Cousins from the Vikings, and we are Vikings fans here. Please don't tell our neighbors. By the way, we live in Wisconsin. Supposed to be Packers fans. But anyway, it's just fascinating and inspiring and heartbreaking, which I'm starting to understand is just the story at this level of every sport. They're under such intense pressure. These 3 guys are completely different people, which is also interesting. We meet their families. We see the importance of the various relationships in their lives, family, friends, teammates, coaches especially. We see, I'm sorry to say this, but we see how incredibly boring it is to be with people who are so focused on one thing. That's terrible. And again, they seem like great people. They really do. It's not that. It's just that they are so deep into what they do, which of course they have to be. There's just no room in their head for anything else. So conversations are a little bit one-dimensional. Let's just say that. There's a beautiful moment where Kirk Cousins is talking about how he literally lets his wife tell him what to wear every day. And he catches a little shit for that because it's a pretty plain Midwest look, which I actually like, by the way. But anyway, he said, and this is so powerful, listen to this. He said, I want all my decision energy going to football. Think of the level of focus in that. He's so committed to this one realm. He doesn't want to divert the bandwidth it takes to think about what he's going to wear. Oh, I love that so much. But again, might not make for the best conversations. Anyway, never mind that. The point is, I'm loving this series after only 1 episode. Highly recommended. Quarterbacks on Netflix. That's it for my recommendation for the week. And that's it for this week's show. If you like what you heard, please do tell your friends, invite them to join us, and rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. That's how new people find the show and get the mental game charge we all need. If you play sports and want to boost your mental game, or you have kids in sports, check out our Mental Game Starter Kit. It's a great set of resources to help anyone take their mental game to the next level. Just go to raiseyourinnergame.com. Scroll to the bottom, you can learn about it and register there. All free, of course. Super helpful resources. If you'd like to support the show so we can keep things ad-free, please click the Buy Me a Coffee link below, and thank you for that. For more mental game goodness, oh my goodness, more goodness, please join our free community, the Raise Your Inner Game Charging Station. Click the link here. It's totally free. You'll love that. If you're listening to this on audio but you like video, all our episodes are posted on our YouTube channel as well. There's a link to that in the show notes. And finally, we will close with Leo Tolstoy, again from the Raise Your Inner Game book. The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity. That's what we're doing. We're doing it together. We're serving the people in our lives. It's super important. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you next time.